Apparently, Birtwistle has a series of little number games that he plays in order to generate material, especially pitch. Oh no, he calls it a wedge-shaped pattern. Ah! Here we have the wedge. Birtwistle did actually say this. He will sketch 2 logical sequences, down a semitone, up a tone, down a tone, and so on until 12 notes of a chromatic scale have been plotted in this shape. Okay, now we're on to tempo, time signature, and rhythmic notation. So, there are changes in meter that happens in the opening 7 pages or so. I assume of Carmen Arcadiae Mechanicae Perpetuum. So in order to do this, let's have a go at composing or looking at some examples of time signatures and how we can use them to come up with a preliminary plot of time signatures on which to structure the music onto. We're leaving the idea of the traditional mindset that you have melody and harmony and rhythm and so on, and we're starting with the time signatures. And in my lecture notes, my lecturer called this a low-level idea, but I don't think he means like it's low. I think he just means it's like that underlying foundation part of the music. It's a low-level idea that you're starting with. So come up with a series of meters. Let's start with these time signatures. We've got 3/8, 2/8, 3/16, 4/8, 5/8 and 3/16. Tempos are important because they are spaces within which you work. This is what Brian Fernyhough says, according to my lecture notes. For my lecturer at the time, he said they are slightly different for him. There are 3 different temporal streams that you can work with here. You have a quaver, equals 72. You have a time signature of 3/8 and rhythms like quaver and triplet quaver. Think of these aspects of 3 different things. You have your tempo, your time signature, and your rhythmic duration, which fit into the bars, basically. So you have these 3 different things. What happens between these things? Something must do, right? It's not like there's just a vacuum. So the first beat of a bar is no more important than any other beat. Even though in Western music, 4/4, we've got it into our heads that it's beat 1 and beat 3, and in reggae it's different, it's 2 and 4, I think. The point is to think outside of these established rules. Notice also Birtwistle's time signatures are palindromic, the bottom numbers. So back to those time signatures I gave an example of. These must be Birtwistle's. It goes 8/8/16, 8/8/16. So the mirror, well, there's a mirror. You've got a palindromic 1, 2, 3. There's the 4th one. Palindrome here, you can draw a line between those 2. Now remember in my Messiaen lecture how Messiaen used palindromes with isorhythms to generate a sense of stasis? Check that lecture if you need to. So, once Birtwistle has got his time signatures laid out, he makes decisions about what happens in between these time frames. This is what my lecturer called low-level decision-making. And again, I'm not sure about this term, I don't know. It's just looking at that foundation and working from that level up. For instance, between the 3/8 and the 2/8, he'd have 2 dotted quavers. This is 2 attack points. So why would he do this? Well, because there's 2 in the 2/8 and he's coming from a 3/8. It creates a blend, I guess, if you think about it. It creates it's weird because you have separate time signatures, but he doesn't switch between those abruptly. He creates this blend between the 2. You've got a time signature that's sort of in between 2 time signatures, if you think about it. But it also harks back to how he's thinking ahead, despite things in the music being isorhythmic and palindromic. So see how you've simultaneously got this cyclical, going nowhere sort of sense of stasis, but at the same time he's thinking ahead. And also I've noticed you've got this conflict between the abrupt changes in the way he's treating musical material, but then there's this blend of different time signatures. Oh, it's fascinating, isn't it? The sense you can get from just having those 2 things in sort of conflict. It's like static and linear at the same time, but not quite. I don't know. I'm having a bit of a moment, an enlightenment moment. So the palindrome is a unifying feature here. You could use it to generate pitch as well, if you wanted. Just go check my Messiaen lecture. But crucially, you have to be prepared to break your own rules if it doesn't work out. I don't know if any of you watching are doing so for your coursework at university, But how you get the pitches is up to you. Use the wedge thing if you want, or something else. It might be logical to do something that along the lines of, say, I developed and expanded Birtwistle's initial idea by doing this, blah, blah, blah. Use some critical creative imagination, and this should help you get those marks. Now onto density and texture. You might want to plot density or texture as a starting point in order to structure the music. For instance, you might want to say, this instrument will come in at this point, and this instrument will come in at this point. Basically, you could have a canon that's so long between each instrument coming in that you won't notice, and you'll actually concentrate on the density build-up, for example. Like with Birtwistle and his ostinato becoming a melody line. He has an ostinato that becomes a melody line. You might have a canon that's so long that the listener can't really perceive it as a canon, and so the focus is more on the density of textures instead. You see what I'm saying? It's like you move away from that traditional way of treating music as we have the melody, we have the canonic writing. And usually things like texture are like there to sort of embellish the canon as the preliminary technique. What if that canon was in the background and the density became the main focus, such that you couldn't quite follow the canon as much? Luigi Nono does things like this all the time. In his mirror canon, he has a massive mirror canon. Check out my lecture on canons for more information about this. So basically he might have a melody or whatever on the violin, and the next time round it comes back on another instrument. So in the mirror it's on another instrument, so he might have something on the piccolo, and in the mirror it's on the double bass. Extreme example. So you can't really hear the repeat, you can't really hear when it's mirrored, it's being displaced registrally, and he's also doing it backwards because it's a mirror canon, remember. So you sense the connection, but it's more difficult to pick up. The point of this is to say, try thinking about the technical things on the minute level or the micro level rather than just the creative things. Because by, say, altering the register, focusing on density, time signatures and so on, you can come up with other things to the music that can really change the overall sound world that you could have completely overlooked had you just focused on the traditional melody, rhythm, harmony and being traditionally creative that way. I suppose it's like exploring the ambiguity between control and randomness. Do you know what I mean? I thought I had it for a minute there. Let's try and summarise the compositional techniques of Harrison Birtwistle. I say confidently, like it can be done. Anyway, I'll just go over what I've talked about in these lectures so far. So there's a strong interest in repetition and its function, from large scale repetition to ostinatos. Birtwistle's music involves both cyclic, please don't let it be cyclic. It involves both cyclic processes and linear processes, and sometimes there's a battle between these two seemingly opposing ways of treating compositional material. I say seemingly opposing ways because what's an opposite? Check out my lectures on dialectics for more about that. There's also an interest in stratification. This is the layering of multiple musical lines. Birtwistle is also interested in medieval compositional techniques such as the cantus firmus and the hocket. There's also an interest in the function of silence and how written out silence is different from fermatas. He also uses instrumental register as a predetermined structure for the piece. And this varies from the more traditional view that music is mainly melody and harmony and rhythm and so on, and the notion that everything else falls into place after this. It doesn't have to be like that. Because as Birtwistle demonstrates in his techniques, there is a focus on density and texture, registers and rhythms, time, tempo, above the more traditional focus on melody and harmony. I know rhythm also comes into both, but the way he focuses on rhythm is slightly different from the traditional way you would focus on rhythm. I was kind of like at one with the harmony, at one with the melody and the harmony, you know. Birtwistle also has recurring rhythms throughout different parts, and he explores the extremes of instrumental registers. He's not so much an extended techniques kind of guy, to quote my lecturer, so he does stay within the capabilities of an instrument in a traditional sense, but he does explore the extremes of those instruments. His music involves abrupt changes of texture that can usurp listeners' expectations until you just know that this is what this guy does, and then you're not really usurped anymore. These abrupt changes, to me, it just gives it more of a mechanical, jerky feel. A bit of an uneasy sort of thing. You're not really allowed to get settled into one thing. I expect this of Birtwistle now, though. Anyway, these abrupt changes in texture are also helped by his abrupt changes in the way he treats his compositional material. For instance, he will intersperse Hockey material amongst isorhythmic material. As I explained earlier, Birtwistle tends to employ a preponderance of particular pitches at particular moments. And his music involves very carefully considered tempos and time signatures, and they involve in themselves isorhythms and palindromes. There also tends to be an apparent struggle between contrasting processes like cyclic and linear processes. So for instance, he will juxtapose isorhythms and a sense of rhythmic direction, like a cadence point. His music is both chaotic and mechanical. Perhaps the reason for Birtwistle's interest in the above compositional techniques can be explained by his fascination with mechanisms. Well, that was a lecture, wasn't it? Thanks for watching, I hope it's been useful. And yep, you might have a canon that's so long that you forget it is, you can't really, the listener can't really perceive it as a canon, and so the focus is more on the density of textures instead.